The KVOE Newsmaker 2 segment underway right now here on 14 KVOE and 96.9 FM. We're pleased to have with us here today Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. Scott, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good. Honored to be here.
Outstanding. Well, obviously being the state's chief election officer, take a look at, just in general terms, how things went with the 2023 legislative session to kind of frame our conversation here.
You know, I appreciate that. It went well for us with our agenda. Obviously, the legislature has lots of agendas.
Sure, yeah,
but,
no doubt.
You know, with Republican leadership and a Democrat governor, we wanted to make some changes in the statute that we knew would become law, as opposed to getting into partisan bickering, because there are some statutes that go back to the 1800s that just needed to be updated.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about election modernization, because that kind of becomes kind of a natural jump into our conversation here. Let's talk about kind of what the original plan was and what passed. Let's start with that.
Well, we had several provisions we tried to pass, and you know, with the rhetoric in around election integrity and election security and voter suppression and whatnot, every now and then a legislator or a certain group would get nervous with what we were trying to do. So if anybody got nervous, we just stripped it out and we'd just stay status quo. But other things, for example, going back to the 1800s, back when we first became a state, Missourians would kidnap our poll workers here in Kansas, so that we couldn't vote to be a free anti-slavery free state.
Right.
And so there's a provision in the law that said that you could elect your own poll workers. Well, that might work in 1865, but it doesn't exactly work in, you know, modern day era where poll workers are sworn in and they take a lot of training. The other thing is, if you remember the recounts last year, there were some concerns simply because, like Karen Tyson had a legitimate concern. She had to say before the Board of Canvassers met which counties she wanted a recount in. Well, you don't know until after the Board of Canvassers meet.
Right.
And so that was a law we've been trying to fix for a while. We've been able to do that. And then also as it relates to like school bond issues and city bond issues, those elections, you have to give 30-day notice, but for UACAVA, federal law for military ballots, you have to give them 45 days to get the ballot out. So we align those two timelines. So these are just statutory fixes that just, when we say modernization, it's a big word that just says we updated things. Because we took what basically was a lot of out of place statutes and just combed everything and basically organized the pantry cabinet.
Gotcha. How does that really play out then for voters? Because it sounds like really on the voter side of things, there's not a whole lot of change with that.
There isn't. This is really making it more efficient for election workers. One of the provisions is, you know, people can write whatever they want as a write-in. In Wichita, during their mayor race last time, 60-some people wrote, Epstein didn't kill himself. Well, that's not even a person, it's a phrase. But that clerk has to count those. What we put in statute said that if you're going to run a write-in campaign in bigger counties like Lyon County, you have to write an affidavit that says, I am intending to run for office. So if there's no Mickey Mouse affidavit signed, the Mickey Mouse vote doesn't count it. It just gets cast out. And so it saves a lot of time.
This is something that we see on you know, as news reporters, and we've seen, you know, periodically, like you're mentioning, Mickey Mouse, cartoon characters, you know, phrases that simply just have no bearing on the election. How big of an issue is, or at least how time consuming is it?
It's very time consuming because prior to this statutory change, those all had to be reported to the county, and it's a waste of the county's time. So you have to count those. Now you can just, it's Mickey Mouse, discard it. You don't have to keep a tally of that, and it doesn't have to be audited either.
Gotcha. Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab joining us here on the Newsmaker 2 segment here today on KVOE. Let's shift gears off of that and let's go to the presidential preference primary, because there's a lot of people who I think get really confused when they hear about the presidential preference primary, and then you have the regular primary, which is coming up. So please explain.
So this August, November, you'll have a normal primary and then a normal local election for school boards and mayor and city elections. And then in March, we're going to have a presidential preference primary. The reason why it's called preference is because normally when we have a primary, whoever wins that primary moves on to the general.
Yep.
That's not necessarily the case here. Neither of the major political parties have really defined their rules of how they're going to allocate delegates for their respective conventions. So they're going to have a primary. It's going to cost the state about $4.3 $1.7 million. And they did put it in the budget to reimburse the counties, which I thought was really important because I don't think counties like Lyon should be on the hook for that.
Right.
And then you'll see somebody, after coming out of Super Tuesday, we may end up having people on the ballot that have since dropped out of the race. But this is what the legislature and the governor wanted to do, and so you can vote in that. It is, the hope is it'll be more voter engagement, and hopefully maybe some candidates will come and try to campaign in Kansas if it's close coming after Super Tuesday.
Sure.
But whoever we elect may not end up on the general ballot come November. Kansas could vote, for example, Ted Cruz, and it could end up being Tim Scott, who ends up on the ballot in November. So we'll see how that plays out. But regardless, it's an election. We always encourage people to participate. If you're unaffiliated, you can affiliate the day of that election if the rules allow at that time, at which point you can participate in the primary.
Sounds like there's a fair amount of, I'm not going to use the term wiggle room, but there's a fair amount of at least uncertainty exactly how this is going to set up for you and for your staff. So
yeah, well, for us, it's just run an election. We'll do what the legislature asks us to, and so our county officials and Tammy Vopot here does a great job. They'll just run the election like they always do. What's can be confusing for voters is, well, we elected this person to be our nominee. Well, yeah, come November, it may not be that person.
Right. Is this one of those things too where say with the presidential preference side of things, is it one of those things where they're going to have both Republican and Democrat votes at the same day? Because if memory serves me correctly, they have had split.
Yeah, before they did a caucus, and how they did that was up to their own. Okay. And you participate. The Democrats kind of did it more like the Iowa caucus, where if you vote for this person, it's almost like ranked choice voting, and the Republicans, you just voted like a traditional election. Well, now this is a traditional election, and it is the same day if both parties agree to participate. It's my understanding they both intend to. Now, the Libertarians, that's kind of a different thing there.
Understood. Okay. Let's talk a little bit as well, too, because there really wasn't a whole lot of attention for much of the session about the advance vote grace period, specifically for mail ballots. I think that came up late in the regular session. It got vetoed, and then lawmakers didn't have enough votes to override. Maybe you can explain more about what the thought process was behind that bill, and then kind of where things stand.
Yeah, so this was after the election on a Tuesday, there's 3-day grace period for your advance mail ballot to show up at the clerk's office, and it must be stamped prior election day or prior. If it's postmarked after it, that ballot will not count. Well, that was done. The reason why they did a 3-day is the post office several years ago shut down a lot of Kansas processing facilities on U.S. mail. So, for example, if you live in Liberal, Kansas, all mail goes to Santa Fe, New Mexico, or Tulsa. If you're in Hayes, it goes to Denver. If you're east part of the state, it goes to Kansas City, Missouri. Right. Wichita goes to Oklahoma City. So almost every ballot leaves the state before it comes back.
And then it comes back for processing.
So, Jamie Shue, Democrat clerk out of Douglas County, wanted 5 days. You had Chris Kobach that wanted 1 or 2 days. They split the difference, and it was 3 days. Well, after the hubbub on the 2020 election, a lot of folks were like, well, why do we do this 3-day? And they had forgot the history. And so there were a lot of folks that just said, no, if the ballot's not at the clerk's office by 7 p.m. on Tuesday, election's over, the ballot doesn't count. That's a policy decision for the legislature. And I do, a lot of rural communities were concerned because, again, if you're a liberal, if you mail that mail ballot, it may not get there. As a matter of fact, some people, and we recommend you don't mail it. That's why we're an advocate for the drop boxes outside the county clerk's office. Because if you mail it, we sometimes get ballots that show up 18 months late. And it was a legally cast ballot, but it just didn't get there on time.
Right. Understood. Is this one of those things that may need to be addressed in future legislative sessions, or do you think this pretty much?
I think this probably ends it. I think it ends it. I know a lot of folks wanted to do it. A lot of leaders were not a big fan of getting rid of the 3-day, but they wanted members to be able to have the opportunity to vote on it, so they can go home and say, "Hey, we tried to vote on this, but it just didn't pass." And so, I'm the first Secretary of State in over 50 years that actually served in the legislature before becoming Secretary of State, and there's an advantage there because you realize realize sometimes you don't want to step on the administration's toes, let them do their job. Well, don't step on the legislature's toes either. If it's a policy question, give guidance to make sure that, hey, this is what our opinion is so that we can execute the job. But whether it's no days or 3 days or 5 days, that's up to the legislature. We'll be compliant with what they ask.
Yeah. Secretary of State Scott Schwab again joining us here on the KVOE Morning Show today. You mentioned already about the upcoming election this year. So what's ahead for your office and your staff here, really, considering this is, by and large, this is a local election, as you mentioned, city commission,
this is kind of what we like to call our downtime. Yeah. Last year we have a lot of folks working weekends and working nights, and we're all same with our clerks. But once it comes down to this election, we don't certify it unless there's a constitutional amendment on the ballot, which there is not. So this is our opportunity to update systems, review laws, see what other states have done. Is there anything we want to migrate this way or make sure we don't do because it's bad policy? So those are some of the things we take this time to do. And also give our staff some extra time off, give them a break, because we've worked so hard to get through that election last year with the primary. Then we have these recounts, and we have the constitutional amendment, highest voter turnout in a primary in the history of the state, and then the general highest turnout in the governor's race in the history of the state. It's time for our team to get a breath, get the blood pressure back down, kind of find that internal peace and family time, and get ready to go next year.
Speaking of next year, and speaking of kind of getting a chance to survey the landscape here, anything from other states that you are looking at that possibly may come in or may, that we're already doing here in Kansas that may need to be adjusted?
Not a whole lot on the election side. I mean, we've said for years we have good laws. We just need to align them. And we have a couple of, tiny ones where we're like, we're going to get sued if we don't get rid of some of these things. And so we were able to fix that up. But on the business side, because some folks forget, you filed your business with our office. There are some updates that we want to do. When we came into office, we were on an AS400. That system's been outdated since the late 80s, early 90s, but yet we're still on it. Where our staff logs into a C prompt. That's how old that system is. So what we're trying to do is we're almost migrated off that system, and we're moving to a business one-stop. And West Virginia does this, and they use a Kansas company to power the software, which is why we should be doing this. I always tease it like West Virginia can't beat a Kansas football team, but yet they're doing something we want to do.
Exactly.
And what it is when you start a restaurant, let's say down here over by the college, or you get Radius Brewing here, the first thing they do is they file their LLC with us. Well, then you got to go to Ag to get your permit for the restaurant. You got to go to revenue to get your liquor permit. You got to get your unemployment from labor. If you want help from commerce, you go there. We're creating a single portal, so you'll just file your LLC, go through the wizard, click send, and your permits will just come in the mail. And that's the things that other states are doing that can make it easier, especially since the pandemic. We're seeing more business startups. A lot of folks who lost their job created a job as opposed to going to find another one. So we want to make it as easy for those entrepreneurs to get up and running and be compliant so they can go and help grow this economy.
And you bring up a really good point, because there's so much, I think for folks that look at the Secretary of State's office, it's elections and it's election only. They do not realize the other facets of what's underneath your umbrella.
Right, and it's really important. And, a lot of folks don't look at, mergers and acquisitions and small business loans, but all that, our office touches all that, because you can't get a loan unless you're a legal entity. And, if you're going to sell your business or if you're going to acquire a business, a lot of that comes right through our office. We have about 6 people employed in the elections division. We have over 30 in that business division. And modernizing that'll help. The biggest win we got out of there and coming off the system will make it better. If you're a business owner, instead of filing every year, you'll be filing every other year. So you'll double the fee, but cut the administration in half. So you'll be paying the same with a lot less work.
Good deal. Scott, are we missing anything either on the election side or maybe the other aspects of the office that you wanted to bring out to the community today?
No, I would just encourage folks, if you're not 18 by the filing deadline, but you're going to be by Election Day, just go ahead and register to vote now, and that clerk will process that at the appropriate time so you can participate. And if you're as young as 16, I will reach out to the clerk's office here in Lyon County or the county that you live in to be a poll worker. We need more poll workers. It's more technology driven, so youth are really helpful. And it looks great for college applications and scholarship applications.
Good point. Scott Schwab, Kansas Secretary of State, thanks so much for joining us here today, making the trip down, and we'll hopefully talk with you again soon.
Look forward to it. Thank you so much.
All right, Kansas is Secretary of State Scott Schwab, our Newsmaker 2 guest here today. If you want to be part of our Newsmaker 2 schedule, make sure that you call us at 620-342-1400 or email kvoe@kvoe.com. Tomorrow's Newsmaker 2 guests actually are Employed Police Officers Jaffer Aga and Alec Ford. The monthly J&A show coming up tomorrow, 8:20 here on KVOE.